This video is going to be a little bit different. In today's video, I would like to give you a behind-the-scenes look at my studio setup. Now, this was motivated by a question that I got recently where somebody asked me how I can actually make sure that I create all these videos, given that I have a full-time job and this is really only a hobby. And back then, my answer was that I have set up everything in such a way that it is as efficient as possible. So all my cameras are constantly set up, all my computer equipment is constantly set up, all my video recording equipment is constantly set up. And I just need to sit down and turn on a couple of power buttons, and then I essentially am ready to go and create a video. And that makes it reasonably efficient. However, back then I didn't really talk too much about what exactly my setup is and what gear do I use and what my video and audio processing pipelines are. So this is what I want to do today. Now, I've decided to split the video into two parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about my computing and audio setup. In the second part, I'm going to talk about my video recording and video streaming setup. The reason I'm splitting up into two parts is primarily because I feel these two parts appeal to different types of audiences. So if you are somebody who is interested in streaming, the second part might be more interesting to you. I'm going to release that next week. Now, with that being said, let's get right into the details. But before I do that, first of all, hello everybody. In case you're new here, my name is Michael Wagner. I teach at the Antoinette Westphal College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And on this channel, I talk about digital media, game design, and spatial audio. And if any of those topics interest you, I invite you to subscribe or join my Discord community. An invite link is in the description below. And since you're already at it, please don't forget to press the like button, as always. Now, before anybody gets too excited, I need to make one thing perfectly clear, and that is that my speaker setup is about as bad as it gets. So if you're setting up a new studio, this is not the way you would normally set up your speakers. The main reason I kept it that way is primarily because I like the way the background looks. So this is more or less an organic development. I had my regular desk here before I created these videos, and then essentially I started to create these videos and I started to notice, hey, the background looks actually quite nice. So I kept everything the way it is. However, I managed to get the speaker sound actually reasonably well, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So at the moment, I don't really feel the need to reposition everything. It actually sounds the way it's supposed to sound, and that is actually a little bit surprising to me, quite honestly. So you don't always have to find the perfect position. Sometimes you need to compromise about what exactly is important to you. In my particular case, the optics were also important, not only the way the speakers sound. So let's get into the details of the computing setup. Now, a lot of people might actually be surprised, but the computer that runs everything here is an ultra notebook, really. It's a Razer Blade Stealth 2020 notebook with a GTX 1650 graphics card, a discrete graphics card. Now, why a laptop? Well, primarily because I travel a lot, and I always had a laptop for this particular purpose that was connected to a docking station, and to some extent everything that I have here is just a huge docking station. So I wanted to have something that I can simply unplug, take with me, and essentially have everything with me all the time. Now, having said that, I actually bought that laptop 2 months before we went into lockdown, so in reality or in retrospect, that might not have been the best choice, but I mean, who knew, honestly? That laptop rarely left his place, and a desktop probably would have been the better solution. But once again, early 2020, we didn't really know that that would be coming. So that's sort of my main computer here. Now, the second thing that I'm using is I have all my main peripherals that I need for my studio, for my audio work, in a little case here. And this case has 2 SSDs along with all the dongles that I need. So they are essentially an iLok dongle, an eLicenser dongle, and a Vibo dongle. And they're all connected inside this case with just one cable. So all I really need to do is when I travel, I disconnect everything. I essentially take that little case. I take the laptop, and I have my entire audio system with me all the time, with all samples, with all licenses and everything. And that is very, very convenient. Now, you might wonder why Razer, and the reason I switched to Razer is a simple, although not particularly good one. Before I actually switched over to Windows about 2 years ago, I was a very passionate Mac user, and I was used to the design language that essentially Apple provides. So switching over to Windows, and I actually had to switch over because I needed to have access to NVIDIA graphics card in order to be able to access CUDA coding. and Macs can't do that. So I needed to switch over to Windows. So I was searching for something that provides a similar designed experience, and I found it Razer to be the most likely equivalent on the Windows side. So if you are a passionate Mac user and you need to switch over to Windows for whatever reason, the Razer line is something that I found comforting, and something that I found I'm not really losing anything out on the experience by switching over to Windows. But once again, as I said before, not a good reason. There's lots of different laptops, lots of different products in the Windows world that actually work maybe even better than the Razer laptops. Now, whenever that laptop is connected to my desk, I'm actually not using the internal graphics card of the laptop. I'm using an external graphics card that sits in a Razer Chroma X breakout box. That is an RTX 2080 Super. Served me well over the last couple of years, and I'm actually quite happy with the way this setup works. So whenever I'm on the road, I'm using the internal graphics. When I'm sort of connected here, I disable the internal graphics and I use the external graphics. If you're contemplating making a setup with an external graphics card, be aware that this can be a little bit temperamental, especially every time when there's a Windows update. I usually need like an hour or two to get everything working again, because drivers conflict and all kinds of things can break, and sometimes it refuses to recognize the external graphics card. But as long as you're not kind of making any sudden changes, this actually works very, very well and very stable, and it has served me well over the last couple of years. So let's talk a little bit about peripherals. Now, there are a couple of things here that are fairly standard, and there are a couple of things that are a little bit unusual. So you might find the one or the other thing quite interesting. So let's go over those for a second. Now, for keyboard and mouse, I'm staying with the Razer theme. The keyboard that I'm using is a Razer Black Widow mini keyboard, and the mouse is an Abyss Essential mouse. I like my keyboard and mouse to be wired, so I don't really like to use wireless devices in this setup, primarily because there's so much technology here that there's a lot of interference, and I usually run into all kinds of issues if I'm using wireless devices. So I like to kind of stick with wired devices. This is why I'm using those. The keyboards that I'm using, the MIDI keyboards, are Nectar devices. I have a Nectar SE25, which is a very inexpensive and very small keyboard. If you're looking for something that is small and inexpensive, I highly recommend that. That probably was the best $50 of my life. It's really, really, really good. Now, a lot of people complain that it feels cheap, but I mean, it's, once again, $50. What can you do? And I also have a bigger keyboard, a Razer Impact GXP 49 here on the side. That's 49 keys. But quite honestly, I usually just use the small one. That's perfectly fine with me. I do have 2 Stream Decks. I'm going to talk about the second Stream Deck next week, because that is not really connected to the computer. That controls my ATEM Mini setup. And then I have a regular Stream Deck that I'm just using as a launcher for all kinds of programs. And then I have 2 devices that are a little bit hidden. The first one is an speed editor from DaVinci Resolve. If you're working with DaVinci Resolve, you need to get the speed editor. That is just the best thing that I ever purchased, quite frankly. It's so convenient to use. And a Wacom tablet in case I'm doing any tutorials where I need to explain students how to do things, what to do. Then essentially I use that. Now, there's one device underneath my desk that I can't show you, because if I show you that, you see all the cables that are underneath there, and that you might expect these devices that I have here. I have, I don't know how many devices, but they're all connected with each other. So the cable management is a little chaotic, let's put it that way. But there's one additional device underneath my desk, and that is an expression pedal. I'm using a standalone expression pedal that I have mapped to the mod wheel. So whenever there's something that I can control with the mod wheel, I can also control it with my foot through that particular expression pedal. And the final peripheral I would like to talk about is something that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, and that is, even though it's one of the nicest control devices that you can get for digital audio workstation, and that is a knob. So let's have a look at my knob. The knob is a surprisingly simple and effective device. It is essentially exactly what it says. It is a knob, so essentially a dial that you can turn around, and it acts like a mouse. And that essentially means that if you are working with a digital audio workstation and you position your mouse over a certain interface element, you can then move that interface element with the dial. And that is really, really convenient. So it's very straightforward to use. It allows you to connect any interface element in the digital audio workstation with a dial. You don't need to install any software because it's just a mouse movement, and and I found that to be one of the best control devices that you can get. Now, if you're interested in that device, I'm going to leave a link in the description below. Just be aware that if you want to purchase one, you usually need to get in line. These are constantly on back order. I think they are handmade. That's why they always need a little bit of time. So what's going to happen is you need to kind of tell them that you want to order one, and then you need to wait a couple of months until they have a new batch available, and they will actually kind of tell you that orders are now open, and then you need to order that. It's not particularly expensive, but you need to wait a little in order to get one. So let's talk about the audio setup, and let's start with the speakers first. Now, I'm using 3 types of speakers. The first set of speakers, those are actually the ones that I had the longest, are the IK Multimedia MTM speakers. These are very small, very nice. So if you're looking for something that is mobile and gives you a very, very good audio quality, these are certainly something I would recommend. But at some point I needed something that's a little bit more studio quality. So I ended up adding the Adam Audio T7V speakers. Now the left speaker currently is a little bit hidden behind the laptop. That's usually not the way I have set it up. Usually I kind of close the laptop and then essentially the speaker is free. It's just for this video that I kept the laptop open. Now, when I originally installed the Adam speakers, I ran into the issue that the audio would disappear at 110 Hertz. Now, my first idea was that this is the result, or probably the result of a room mode, which would be unfortunate because this is something you can only resolve by completely reconfiguring your studio space, because the room mode, once again, is a property of the room. So essentially something that is happening here. However, after measuring the speakers individually, I noticed that the audio did not disappear if I only had one speaker active at a time. So the left speaker would actually work fine, the right speaker would work fine. Only if both speakers were working at the same time, the audio would disappear at 110 Hertz. So I started to realize that this is really a comb filter, and the comb filter is probably a result of the asymmetric positioning of the speakers that I have here. The way I resolved that is by adding a subwoofer with a 120 Hertz crossover frequency. The subwoofer that I'm using is the T10, the Adam Audio T10S, and that has essentially resolved that problem completely. So 2 things that I learned from that. First of all, if you're using the Adam speakers, add a subwoofer. It's just incredible how these 3 speakers sound together. And second, if you are working in an environment and you're starting to feel that a certain frequency in the low frequency is disappearing, check if that is if that is a result of a comb filter. And if it is, you might actually be able to resolve that by adding a subwoofer and having a crossover frequency above the frequency that disappears in your speaker setup. The third type of speaker that I'm using is an Auratone Mix Cube. And if you've never heard about those are used to monitor mid frequencies. They are known to be very honest. So the saying is that if it sounds good on a mix cube, it sounds good everywhere. And that's something that I can confirm. Now, there are different opinions about those out there. Some people will recommend them. Some people will say they are not really needed. I personally can recommend them. They're really, really good. And they definitely helped me figuring out how my audio sounds, or kind of how my audio translates to all kinds of devices. Now, I already mentioned that I'm not really using a audio interface. What I'm using instead is I'm using a digital analog converter, or a DAC. And the one that I'm using is the Sheet Modius, a digital audio converter, a digital analog converter. The reason I'm using that one is because of cost price, essentially. That's sort of, it's the best device that you can get for the price. And it has one additional advantage that really helps me, and that is that it has two outputs, a balanced output and an unbalanced output. The balanced output is something that I use for my regular monitoring setup, so that is fed into the speakers that I just showed you. And the unbalanced output is forward into a mixer that I'm using for creating these videos. So this essentially allows me to send the audio into 2 different directions, one for the audio setup and one for the video setup, and that is really useful for me personally. Now, in order to control the monitors, I'm using a monitor controller from Behringer. This is a really old one, but also a really good one. I'm not quite sure why they don't produce more of those, because it's really, really useful. That essentially allows me to switch between the different types of speakers that I have, so I can turn on or off the IK Multimedia, the Adam Audio, or the Auratone speakers, and I can have multiple of them run at the same time, and that actually works quite well. And this is also where I connect my 2 headphones to. So let's finally talk about headphones. Now, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that one set of headphones that I use frequently are the DT1990 Pro, the biodynamic headphones, and they're really, really good. I can only recommend them. However, they have one disadvantage, and the disadvantage is that they are very forward at the higher frequencies. Some people say that they sound harsh, which allows you to hear a lot of detail, but still kind of it is harsh. Unfortunately, that became a bit of an issue for me. A little over a year ago, I had an ear infection, and that ear infection left me with permanent tinnitus. I actually made a video about that. And that tinnitus manifests itself as a high-pitched frequency that I hear constantly. And unfortunately, that high-pitched frequency is exactly at the range where these are forward. And that essentially means that these headphones become very fatiguing for me. So I can only use them for maybe an hour, and then I have to take them off because they become too fatiguing for me. So I have recently switched to a different set of headphones, and that is a completely new set of headphones that came out only a couple of months ago. And those are the Neumann NDH30. I sort of got pointed towards them by some reviewers who said that these headphones sound exactly like the DT1990, with the exception that they're not as harsh. And I tried them, and these are really, really incredible. So if you want to have really, really good headphones that have the same quality of the biodynamic DT990, but they are not sounding as harsh as the DT990, I can only recommend those. Those are probably the best headphones that I've ever used. And they sound pretty much exactly like my Adam speakers should sound. That's actually one of the things that was completely new to me. Normally, when I switch from speakers to headphones, I usually kind of hear a difference in the sound signature. This is not the case here. These sound exactly like the speakers, or at least in the setup that I am having here. And they have one additional advantage, which sounds a little simple, but it's actually a big advantage for me, and that is they kind of fold. Why do not more manufacturers do that? That essentially means that I can now take my studio headphones on the road. They're mobile, and that really is really very something that is very useful for me. Now, I do need to point out not everything is super about those, so just be aware. They're not exactly cheap. They're not particularly expensive either, so they are in the $600 range. So it's sort of in the mid range. But I personally ran into a bit of an issue with the pads. These are actually the first headphones that I have where my ears touch the inner foam of the pads. And that is something that I first thought would become an issue, but as it turns out, it's actually something that you get used to. So just be aware, if you want to try them, I think they sound terrific. These are probably the best sounding headphones I ever had, but they are not as comfortable as some of the other headphones that I have. Now, if you've been watching my recent videos, you also know that I have a third pair of headphones that I use in these videos, and those are the Focal Elegia. However, I'm not going to use them for music production simply because they're a little bit too colored. So they are they're very nice to listen to. So those are essentially fun headphones. But I wouldn't use them for music production. The reason I have that in my setup is primarily because when I do videos or when I produce videos, I need a pair of closed headphones, and I'm essentially using those also as closed headphones. I picked them up at a sale for an incredibly low price at some point, and I really enjoy them, but I'm only using them when I'm producing videos. So a couple of final things that I should probably mention, and the first thing is that in addition to my Windows laptop, I also have a MacBook here. The MacBook is here on a swivel that I can use, and that's connected to my system as well. It's a 2016 MacBook Pro that's probably going to be replaced with a MacBook Air relatively soon. I have one MacBook Air on order. And if you've watched my videos where I'm using Mac, this is the Mac that I'm using, and the way I'm usually using it is through Parsec. So I run the Mac with Parsec in host mode and then connect through Windows into Parsec. In the future, I might think about adding a KVM switch so that I can switch between the systems, but at the moment, that works perfectly fine. And then one final thing, all these devices are connected to a rack-mounted power strip, and that rack-mounted power strip has individual power switches. So if I need to connect, or if I need to turn on and off certain devices, I can simply do that on my power switch. In the rack mount, you're going to see that next week when I'm going to talk about the video setup, because it's sort of in the rack that I'm using there. And that allows me to be very flexible and turn on and off certain devices depending on if I need them. And finally, everything is connected to a battery backup system, a UPS system that is capable of running the entire setup for about 10 minutes. So if I'm in a meeting, for example, and I lose power, which unfortunately in the United States happens more often than you think it would, then I can tell everybody in that meeting, hey, I lost power, and I can gracefully remove myself from that meeting and essentially shut everything down to make sure everything is shut down accordingly. Once again, it's not going to hold for a very long time. It can bypass any short power outages, anything that just lasts for a minute or two, but after a couple of minutes, I need to shut everything down because there's a lot of power that these devices draw, and even though this is a very powerful battery backup, it only lasts for about 10 minutes. So this is really everything I wanted to say today. Thanks again for watching. If you have any questions, please use the comment section below. If you have any suggestions, please use the comment section below or join my Discord community. And that link is in the description below. Once again, there's going to be a second part where I'm going to talk about the video setup, which is also going to be very interesting. I'm going to post it next week. And until then, see you at the next video.